The kitchen sink had been dripping for 3 weeks, and at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, I finally decided to fix the damn thing. Not because I suddenly developed an urgent need for plumbing perfection, but because the rhythmic patter was driving me insane, and insomnia had become my closest companion lately. I was elbow deep in the cabinet beneath the sink, flashlight clenched between my teeth, when I heard the front door open. Catherine was back from her 2-week solo journey of self-discovery to the Amalfi Coast. Right on schedule. The wheels of her suitcase rolled across our hardwood floors with that familiar clickety-clack that used to mean homecoming. Now it sounded more like a countdown timer reaching 0. I didn't rush to greet her. Instead, I tightened the pipe joint with deliberate precision, listening to her movements above. She was taking her time, probably rehearsing whatever speech she'd crafted during the flight home. Catherine had always been theatrical. It's what made her such a successful real estate agent. She could sell anyone on anything, including the fantasy that her marriage was salvageable. "William?" Her voice carried that carefully modulated tone she used with difficult clients. "Are you awake?" "Down here," I called back, not bothering to extract myself from the cabinet. "Just fixing your dripping sink." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, silhouetted against the hallway light. Even in the dim lighting, I could see she'd gotten a tan. A very even, well-maintained tan that spoke of poolside lounging and careful sunscreen application. The kind of tan you get when someone else is making sure you don't burn. "We need to talk," she said, setting down her purse with theatrical precision. I finally emerged from beneath the sink, wiping my hands on an old towel. Catherine stood there in her traveling clothes, designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and a silk blouse that had somehow survived international travel without a single wrinkle. She looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, not out of a cramped airplane seat. "How was Italy?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how she'd play this. She ran a hand through her perfectly styled hair, another miracle of modern travel, apparently. "It was illuminating." I nodded, turning off the water supply and testing the faucet. No more drip. Illuminating. That's a good word for it. Catherine moved closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume. Not the one I'd bought her for Christmas. This was something new. Something that probably came in a bottle shaped like a seashell or had an Italian name I couldn't pronounce. "William, I've been doing a lot of thinking." She paused, clearly expecting me to look up from my tools with concern etched across my face. When I didn't, she continued, "About us, about our marriage, about what I really want from life." "And what do you want from life, Catherine?" I asked, packing up my toolbox with methodical care. She took a deep breath, the kind actors take before delivering their big monologue. "I'm really not sure about us anymore." There it was. The line she'd probably practiced in the hotel mirror, maybe even run past her travel companion for feedback. It was designed to hit me like a sledgehammer, to send me into a panic of desperate promises and frantic attempts to win her back. Instead, I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a sarcastic smirk, but a genuinely calm, almost peaceful expression that seemed to throw her completely off script. "Actually," I said, closing my toolbox with a satisfying click, "I already signed the divorce papers this morning." The change in her expression was something to behold. The carefully constructed mask of conflicted wife slipped away, replaced by something raw and unguarded. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. For the first time in our 12-year marriage, Catherine Ashford was speechless. "What?" she finally managed. "The divorce papers. I signed them around 10:30 right after my morning coffee. Douglas Whitmore has everything ready to file. We just need your signature now." She stared at me like I'd just announced I was actually an alien from Mars. You can't be serious." Completely serious. I picked up my toolbox and headed toward the garage. "Oh, and Catherine, Your sink's fixed now. No more dripping. I left her standing in the kitchen, and for once in our marriage, I had the last word. The garage had become my sanctuary over the past few months. It was where I kept my tools, my workbench, and most importantly, my filing cabinet. The one Catherine had never bothered to explore because it contained boring business stuff that was beneath her interest. If she had looked, she might have found the folder labeled Amalfi Coast documentation. She might have seen the credit card statements showing charges for 2 people at restaurants that were supposed to serve only her. She might have noticed the hotel bills that included spa treatments for couples or the car rental agreement that specified a second driver. She definitely would have found the photographs. Gregory Thornton was a predictable man. Predictable in his arrogance, his social media habits, and his complete inability to conduct a discreet affair. While Catherine had been careful to avoid posting pictures of them together, Gregory had no such restraint. His Instagram account was a monument to his own ego, and apparently my wife had become part of that monument. There they were, in all their high-definition glory, Gregory and Catherine at a seaside restaurant, sharing what was obviously an intimate dinner. Gregory and Catherine on a yacht, his arm around her waist as she laughed at something he'd said. Gregory and Catherine at some kind of vineyard tour, both holding wine glasses and looking absolutely delighted with themselves. The timestamps told the story. Every single photo corresponded with a day Catherine had texted me about her solo adventures. The day she'd sent me a picture of her quiet dinner alone matched perfectly with Gregory's post of their romantic meal. Her peaceful morning meditation had actually been a couple's massage at a luxury spa. I had to admire the audacity of it all. Catherine had always been thorough in her deceptions, but this time she'd gotten sloppy. Or maybe she'd just gotten comfortable, assuming I was too trusting or too stupid to piece it together. She was wrong on both counts. The evidence had been accumulating for weeks before her trip. Late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. New clothes that appeared in her closet without explanation. Mysterious appointments that never quite made it onto our shared calendar. But it was the Italy trip that had provided the smoking gun. Catherine had suggested it herself. 2 weeks of solo travel to rediscover herself and gain perspective on our relationship. She'd been so earnest about it, so convincing in her portrayal of a woman struggling with midlife questions and seeking clarity through solitude. I'd encouraged her to go. Hell, I'd even helped her plan it, suggesting restaurants and booking her flights. What I hadn't told her was that I'd also activated the location sharing on our joint phone plan, set up alerts for our shared credit cards, and created a Google alert for Gregory Thornton's name. Modern technology makes it remarkably easy to catch a cheating spouse, assuming they're stupid enough to leave a digital trail. Catherine and Gregory had left a highway of evidence so wide and obvious that a blind man could have followed it. The real question wasn't whether Catherine was having an affair that had been obvious for months. The real question was what I was going to do about it. Some men might have confronted her immediately, demanding explanations and ultimatums. Others might have tried to win her back, showering her with attention and romantic gestures in a desperate attempt to compete with her lover. I chose a different path entirely. Douglas Whitmore had been our family attorney for 8 years. He'd handled our house purchase, written our wills, and managed various business contracts for my cybersecurity firm. He was a thin, precise man who wore wire-rimmed glasses and had the unsettling ability to remain completely emotionless while discussing the most personal details of people's lives. "I need to file for divorce," I'd told him 3 days after Catherine left for Italy. Douglas had nodded as if I'd just asked him to review a standard business contract. "Grounds? Adultery. I have documentation." He'd reviewed my evidence with the same clinical detachment he brought to everything else. Credit card records, social media posts, hotel receipts, location data. It was all there, laid out in chronological order with the methodical precision that had made my business successful. "This is quite thorough," he'd said finally. She's made no attempt to hide the financial aspects of the relationship. She thought I was too trusting to check, and too passive to act on it if you did. Douglas had removed his glasses and cleaned them with deliberate care. I assume you want to move quickly? I want it done before she gets back. That's aggressive. Most people prefer to attempt reconciliation first. I'd leaned back in his leather chair, considering my words carefully. Douglas, if someone breaks into your house, do you invite them to stay for dinner? He'd smiled then, the first genuine emotion I'd ever seen from him. I'll have the papers ready by Monday. True to his word, the divorce documents had been waiting for my signature when I arrived at his office that morning. No-fault divorce with a clear division of assets, spousal support calculations, and a comprehensive list of marital property. Catherine would get exactly what she was legally entitled to, no more, no less. What she wouldn't get was the satisfaction of controlling the narrative. I'd spent 12 years letting Catherine manage the emotional temperature of our relationship. She decided when we fought, when we reconciled, and how every major decision got made. She'd choreographed our entire marriage like a dance where she always led and I always followed. But this time, I was changing the music. The sound of footsteps on the garage stairs interrupted my thoughts. Catherine appeared in the doorway, still wearing that shell-shocked expression from our kitchen encounter. "We need to discuss this rationally," she said, trying to regain her composure. "Nothing to discuss. You wanted clarity about our relationship, and now you have it." She moved closer, switching to what I recognized as her concerned wife persona. "William, I know I've been distant lately, but that doesn't mean—" "How was Gregory?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She actually took a step backward, her hand reaching for the doorframe for support. "I don't know what you mean." I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder. Gregory Thornton, 46 years old, real estate developer, owns that ridiculous yacht he's always posting pictures of. The same yacht where you two enjoyed champagne on Tuesday afternoon while you were supposedly having a quiet day of reflection. Catherine's face had gone completely pale. "You've been spying on me. I've been paying attention. There's a difference." I spread some of the printed photographs across my workbench. Catherine stared at them like they were evidence of war crimes. "These could be anyone," she said weakly. "Could be, but they're not." I pointed to one particular photo. "That's the bracelet I bought you for our anniversary last year, and that's the scar on your left shoulder from when you fell off your bike as a kid. You want to keep pretending? Or should we move on to discussing the logistics?" She collapsed into the old chair I kept in the corner, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling completely. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married, vulnerable, human, real. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Suspected? About 6 months. Known for certain? Since day 3 of your trip. Why didn't you say anything?" I considered the question seriously. Why hadn't I confronted her immediately? Why hadn't I demanded explanations or thrown her out or made a scene? "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go," I said finally. "I wanted to know if you'd come home and try to lie to my face. And now you know. Now I know." Catherine looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't quite fear, but it wasn't far from it. "What happens now?" she asked. I closed the folder and put it back in the filing cabinet. "Now you sign the papers, we divide up our stuff, and we both move on with our lives." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She stood up slowly, like someone recovering from a long illness. "William, I want you to know that I never meant for this to happen. Gregory and I, it just sort of developed over time." "How long?" "What?" "How long have you been together?" She hesitated, clearly calculating how much truth she could afford to tell. 8 months. "Try again." "What do you mean?" I pulled out another folder, this one considerably thicker. "I mean, try telling me the truth. Because I've got hotel receipts going back 14 months, and restaurant charges that predate your Italy trip by over a year. The last bit of fight went out of her then. She slumped back into the chair, looking older than I'd ever seen her. 18 months, she said quietly. There we go. Honesty. It's refreshing. Catherine looked around the garage as if seeing it for the first time. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? Planning what? This. The divorce, the evidence gathering, the dramatic revelation. You've been setting me up. I locked the filing cabinet and turned to face her fully. Catherine, I've been protecting myself. There's a difference between setting someone up and documenting their choices. You could have talked to me. We could have worked through this. Could we? Really? I leaned against the workbench, studying her face. When exactly would that conversation have happened? Before you booked the hotel room in Gregory's name? Before you told me you needed space to think about our marriage? Or maybe after you came home planning to manipulate me into some kind of reconciliation while you kept seeing him behind my back? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown until we sort out the living arrangements, I said. My lawyer will be in touch with yours about the details. You don't have to leave. This is your house, too. It was our house. Now it's just a building with too many memories and not enough trust. I picked up my toolbox and headed for the stairs. At the doorway, I paused and looked back at her. Catherine? Yes? Next time you decide to have an affair, maybe choose someone who doesn't post his entire life on social media. I left her sitting in the garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had kept me sane during the long months of discovering just how little my marriage had meant to the woman I'd loved. The Marriott had a decent bar, and at this hour it was mostly empty, except for a few business travelers nursing their own disappointments. I ordered a whiskey, something expensive that I'd never allowed myself to buy when I was being a responsible married man, and tried to process what had just happened. For 18 months, I'd been living a lie. Every morning coffee, every shared dinner, every conversation about our future had been built on a foundation of deception so complete that it made me question my own perception of reality. But strangely, I didn't feel angry. I felt relieved. The marriage had been over long before Catherine boarded that plane to Italy. Maybe it had been over before she'd even met Gregory. We'd been going through the motions for years, two people sharing a house and a bank account, but not much else. Her affair hadn't destroyed our marriage, it had just finally made the destruction visible. My phone buzzed with a text message. Catherine, of course. We need to talk about this properly. Can you come home? I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to talk about. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen, and the audience was already heading for the exits. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of rebuilding my life. Tonight, I was going to finish my whiskey and toast the end of 12 years of slowly suffocating in someone else's version of happiness. The bartender, a guy about my age with tired eyes and steady hands, refilled my glass without being asked. Rough night? He asked. Actually, I said, raising the glass. It's the best night I've had in years. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after a major decision. I woke up in the Marriott's surprisingly comfortable bed, ordered room service coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of the burnt offerings Catherine preferred, and spent an hour reviewing my financial situation with the methodical precision that had built my cybersecurity business from nothing into something worth protecting. Douglas Whitmore called at exactly 9 o'clock. She's retained Jennifer Walsh, he said without preamble. I knew the name. Walsh was Catherine's friend from law school, a divorce attorney who specialized in extracting maximum settlements from wealthy husbands. She had a reputation for turning even amicable divorces into scorched earth campaigns. Interesting choice, I said. I thought Catherine might want to keep this civilized. Apparently not. Walsh has already filed a motion requesting temporary spousal support and exclusive use of the marital residence. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. On what grounds? Emotional distress and financial dependency. She's claiming you've created a hostile environment through surveillance and intimidation. The audacity was breathtaking, even for Catherine. She'd spent 18 months conducting an affair, lied about a vacation that was actually a romantic getaway with her lover, and now she was positioning herself as the victim of my hostile behavior. How do you want to respond? Douglas asked. Aggressively. File our counter motion with all the evidence we discussed. And Douglas, let's add a request for attorney fees. If Catherine wants to play hardball, she can pay for the privilege. Understood. One more thing. Walsh is requesting all financial records for the past 2 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, business accounts, investment portfolios. I smiled. Give her everything. Complete transparency. There was a pause on Douglas's end. Are you certain? Most people prefer to limit discovery. Most people don't have 18 months of documented evidence showing their spouse's affair. Every hotel bill, every restaurant charge, every gift Gregory bought her with our money, it's all going to be part of the public record now. That's comprehensive. That's justice. After ending the call, I drove to my office for the first time in 3 weeks. Ashford Cybersecurity occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District, a space I'd chosen for its high ceilings and industrial aesthetic, rather than any particular business advantage. My team of 12 had been handling client work in my absence, but there were decisions that required my personal attention. My assistant, Rebecca, looked up from her desk with obvious relief when I walked in. "Thank God you're back," she said. "The Morrison account is threatening to walk if we don't deliver their penetration testing report by Friday." "Where do we stand?" 90% complete, but the final security recommendations need your review. I spent the next 4 hours immersed in the familiar rhythm of technical analysis and client management. It was exactly what I needed. Problems with clear solutions, challenges that responded to logic and expertise rather than emotional manipulation. Around 2 o'clock, Rebecca knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." Gregory Thornton stood in my reception area like he owned the place. He was exactly what I'd expected from his social media presence. Tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of artificial confidence that comes from never being seriously challenged. "William," he said, extending his hand as if we were meeting at a country club. "I think we need to talk." I ignored the handshake. "My office." Gregory followed me down the hall, taking in the surroundings with the calculating gaze of someone who measured everything in terms of net worth and social status. "Nice setup," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Catherine mentioned you were in tech." Catherine mentioned a lot of things, apparently. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Look, I know this is awkward. Awkward is showing up uninvited to someone's workplace. What you did is something else entirely." Gregory shifted in his chair, clearly not used to being on the defensive. "I came here because I think we can handle this situation like adults. Adults don't conduct 18-month affairs behind their spouse's back." "How did you—" He caught himself, but it was too late. "Know how long it's been? I'm in cybersecurity, Gregory. Data analysis is what I do for a living." He tried to regain his composure. Catherine and I never meant for things to develop the way they did. It just happened. Hotel reservations don't just happen. Vacation planning doesn't just happen. Lying to your spouse for a year and a half doesn't just happen. Gregory leaned forward, switching to what I assumed was his business negotiation mode. "What I'm trying to say is that Catherine and I are serious about each other. This isn't some casual fling. Congratulations. I hope you'll be very happy together." That seemed to throw him off script. "You're not going to fight for her?" The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. "Fight for her? Gregory, you can have her. Consider it a gift." His confusion was genuine. I don't understand. Let me explain it in terms you might appreciate. Catherine is like a luxury car with a hidden defect. She looks great from the outside, performs well in ideal conditions, but eventually the problems become impossible to ignore. I'm trading her in before the warranty expires. You're buying her used, with full knowledge of the defect history. Gregory's face darkened. That's a pretty cold way to talk about your wife. Ex-wife. And you're right, it is cold. 18 months of deception tends to have that effect on a person. He stood up abruptly. Catherine said you were bitter. Catherine says a lot of things. Most of them aren't true. After he left, I sat in my office trying to understand what had just happened. Gregory had come here expecting, what? A confrontation? A fight? Some kind of dramatic scene where two men battled over a woman's affections? Instead, he'd gotten a business transaction, clean, efficient, and utterly without the emotional drama he'd probably been anticipating. My phone rang. Catherine. What did you say to Gregory? She demanded without preamble. Hello to you too. He came to see you today. He's upset. He should be. He just realized he's inheriting someone else's problems. That's a horrible thing to say, but accurate. There was a long pause. William, I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Catherine. Angry would imply I still care enough about your choices to have an emotional response to them. Then what are you? I considered the question seriously. Disappointed. In you, in myself, in the 12 years I wasted believing in something that was never real. Our marriage was real. Parts of it were. The parts where I was honest with you, where I trusted you, where I actually meant the things I said. But your half? That was just performance art. You don't mean that. I mean every word of it. And Catherine? Tell Gregory that if he ever shows up at my office again, I'll have him escorted out by security. I hung up before she could respond. The rest of the week passed in a blur of legal documents, client meetings, and the strange logistics of dismantling a 12-year marriage. Douglas had been right about Jennifer Walsh. She was turning what should have been a straightforward divorce into a complex negotiation involving temporary restraining orders, asset valuations, and competing claims of emotional distress. But Walsh had made one critical error. She'd underestimated the depth of my documentation. Every credit card charge Catherine had claimed as personal expenses could be cross-referenced with Gregory's social media posts. Every girls' night out that had actually been a romantic dinner was now part of the legal record. Every lie she'd told about her whereabouts was contradicted by location data, receipts, and photographic evidence. By Friday, Walsh was requesting a settlement conference. She wants to negotiate, Douglas informed me over lunch at his private club. What's her opening position? 50% of marital assets, permanent spousal support, and exclusive use of the house for 2 years. I nearly choked on my soup. She's joking. She's not, but her position is significantly weakened by the evidence we've provided. Walsh knows she's fighting an uphill battle. What's our counteroffer? Douglas smiled his thin, predatory smile. Exactly what the law requires and not 1 penny more. She gets her statutory share of marital assets, limited spousal support for 2 years, and she can buy out your interest in the house or we sell it and split the proceeds. And if she refuses? Then we go to trial, where all of this evidence becomes part of the public record. Every hotel bill, every restaurant receipt, every photograph of her vacation with Gregory Thornton becomes available to anyone who wants to read the court documents. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Catherine would have to sit in a room with me, our lawyers, and a mediator while we reduced 12 years of marriage to a series of financial calculations and property divisions. I found myself looking forward to it. That weekend, I drove out to the house to collect more of my belongings. Catherine's car was gone, probably spending the weekend with Gregory, so I had the place to myself. Walking through rooms that had once felt like home was surreal. Everything looked the same: but the context had changed so completely that it might as well have been a museum exhibit. Marriage, American middle class, early 21st century. I packed methodically, taking only what was genuinely mine. Clothes, books, tools, a few pieces of furniture that predated the marriage. I left behind the wedding photos, the shared purchases, the accumulated detritus of a relationship that had been fading for years. In the bedroom, I found Catherine's jewelry box sitting open on the dresser. The bracelet I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she'd worn on her romantic getaway with Gregory, was lying on top of everything else. I picked it up, remembering the day I'd bought it. I'd spent weeks researching the perfect gift, finally settling on a custom piece from a local artisan. The inscription on the back read, "To Kat, my partner in everything. Love always W. Partner in everything." The irony was almost too perfect. I put the bracelet back in the box and continued packing. As I loaded the last box into my truck, I noticed Mrs. Henderson from next door working in her garden. She'd been our neighbor for 8 years, a widow in her 70s who kept track of everyone's comings and goings with the dedication of a professional surveillance expert. "Moving out?" she asked, not bothering to pretend she hadn't been watching me. "Temporarily." She nodded sagely. "Saw Catherine leave with that man in the fancy car. Seems to be spending a lot of time with him lately." "People change, Mrs. Henderson." "Some people do. Others just stop pretending to be something they never were." I looked at her more carefully. "How long have you known?" "About the affair?" "Honey, I've been watching him come and go for over a year. Always when you were at work, always parked around the corner like he was fooling someone." "Why didn't you say anything?" Mrs. Henderson straightened up, brushing dirt off her gardening gloves. "Wasn't my place to tell you, but it was my place to notice. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, I always liked you better than her anyway. You actually wave when you see me in the yard." I drove back to the hotel, thinking about Mrs. Henderson's words. How many other people had known about Catherine's affair? How many friends, neighbors, and acquaintances had watched me living a lie while being too polite or too uncomfortable to say anything? The thought should have been humiliating. Instead, it was oddly liberating. I wasn't the fool who'd been too stupid to see what was happening right in front of me. I was just the last person to get official confirmation of something everyone else had already figured out. But now I knew. And knowledge, as I'd learned in my business, was the foundation of all effective action. The settlement conference was 3 days away. Catherine and Gregory thought they were dealing with a heartbroken husband who would eventually roll over and give them whatever they wanted in exchange for a quiet divorce. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The law offices of Walsh and Associates occupied the top floor of a glass tower downtown, all marble surfaces and expensive art designed to intimidate opposing parties into generous settlements. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing my best suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained enough documentation to bury Catherine's credibility so deep it would need archaeological excavation. The lobby alone felt like a psychological weapon: polished stone floors that echoed every footstep, abstract sculptures that looked aggressively meaningless, and a wall of windows that reminded visitors just how small they were compared to the city below. Everything about the space was meant to project power, confidence, and inevitability. I checked in with the receptionist and took a seat, setting the portfolio on my knee like a loaded instrument waiting to be used. Douglas was already waiting in the reception area, reviewing his notes with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. He didn't look up immediately, just turned one page, then another, mentally rehearsing the sequence of moves we'd already discussed at length. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for months." Jennifer Walsh greeted us with the kind of professional smile that never reached the eyes. She was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd built a reputation on extracting maximum settlements from reluctant ex-husbands. Her handshake was firm, her posture impeccable, her expression carefully neutral. "Gentlemen," she said, leading us into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "I'm hoping we can resolve this matter efficiently." Catherine was already seated at the long table, looking smaller somehow than she had in our garage confrontation. Gone was the defiance, the sharp edges. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a conservative navy dress that projected respectability and vulnerability in equal measure, the kind of outfit designed to make a silent argument before a single word was spoken. Gregory sat beside her, his presence apparently meant to demonstrate that she had moved on and found happiness elsewhere, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable in the setting. The mediator, a stern woman named Margaret Foster, took her place at the head of the table and opened her file. Her movements were precise, economical, the practiced routine of someone who'd seen every variation of betrayal, denial, and negotiation imaginable. "We're here to discuss the dissolution of marriage between William and Catherine Ashford," she began. "Mrs. Walsh, I understand you've prepared an opening statement." Walsh stood up and launched into a carefully crafted narrative that bore only passing resemblance to reality. According to her version of events, Catherine was a devoted wife who'd grown increasingly isolated in a marriage to a workaholic husband. The Italy trip had been a desperate attempt to save their relationship, framed as a last, hopeful gesture rather than a calculated deception. William's surveillance and harassment, she claimed, had crossed boundaries and made reconciliation impossible. She spoke smoothly, confidently, weaving emotional language with legal phrasing in a way that was clearly well practiced. Catherine played her part perfectly, eyes downcast, hands folded, the picture of quiet endurance. "Mrs. Ashford is seeking reasonable spousal support and an equitable division of assets," Walsh concluded. "She's also requesting exclusive use of the marital residence during the transition period, given the emotional distress caused by her husband's invasive monitoring of her personal activities." It was a masterful performance, hitting all the right notes of victimization and reasonable compromise. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been impressed. Margaret Foster turned to Douglas. "Mr. Whitmore?" Douglas opened his portfolio with deliberate care, as if timing itself were a strategic element. "Thank you, Ms. Foster. I'd like to begin by clarifying the timeline of events that led to this proceeding." He placed the first exhibit on the table, a chronological summary of Catherine's affair, complete with dates, locations, and supporting documentation laid out with ruthless clarity. "Mrs. Ashford's trip to Italy was not an attempt to save her marriage," Douglas said calmly. "It was a romantic vacation with her lover of 18 months, Gregory Thornton, who is present in this room today." Catherine's face went pale. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly very interested in the grain of the conference table. Walsh recovered quickly, professionalism snapping back into place. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Whitmore. I hope you have evidence to support it." "Substantial evidence," Douglas replied, placing a stack of photographs on the table. "These images were posted to Mr. Thornton's public social media accounts during the period Mrs. Ashford claims to have been traveling alone." The photos spread across the conference table like a hand of cards in a high-stakes poker game. Catherine and Gregory at dinner on the yacht, touring vineyards, sharing intimate moments that had been broadcast to the world through Gregory's Instagram account. The timestamps were unforgiving. "Additionally," Douglas continued, "we have hotel records, credit card statements, and location data that conclusively demonstrate Mrs. Ashford was not traveling alone." He placed another set of documents on the table with quiet precision. "These receipts show charges for couples' activities, shared meals, and hotel accommodations for 2 people, all paid for with marital assets." Margaret Foster examined the evidence with growing interest, her pen pausing mid-note. "Mrs. Walsh, how does your client respond to this documentation?" Walsh whispered urgently with Catherine for several minutes, their heads close together, voices low and tense, before responding. "My client's personal relationships are not relevant to the financial aspects of this dissolution." They are when those relationships involve the misuse of marital assets, Douglas countered without hesitation. Mr. Ashford's cybersecurity firm generates significant income, which Mrs. Ashford has been using to finance her extramarital relationship. Furthermore, he continued, placing yet another stack of documents on the table, we have evidence that this misuse of funds extends back 18 months, including gifts, travel expenses, and entertainment costs, totaling approximately $47,000. The number hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Catherine stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes, her carefully constructed composure finally eroding. Gregory finally spoke up. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Thornton, Margaret Foster interrupted sharply. You're not a party to this proceeding. Please refrain from commenting. Walsh regrouped quickly, shifting tactics without missing a beat. Even assuming these allegations are accurate, they don't justify the punitive approach Mr. Whitmore is suggesting. Mrs. Ashford is entitled to her statutory share of marital assets, regardless of any personal indiscretions. Agreed, Douglas said, which is why our settlement offer is exactly what the law requires. Mrs. Ashford will receive her statutory share of marital assets, minus the $47,000 she spent on her affair, plus limited spousal support for 24 months. That's completely unreasonable, Walsh protested. It's mathematically precise, Douglas replied. Every dollar Mrs. Ashford spent on her relationship with Mr. Thornton was a dollar taken from marital assets. Basic accounting principles require that theft to be deducted from her settlement. You're calling my client a thief? I'm calling her spending patterns a misappropriation of marital funds. The legal terminology is less important than the financial reality. Margaret Foster had been taking notes throughout the exchange. Mrs. Walsh, does your client dispute the authenticity of this evidence? Catherine finally looked up from the table. No, she said quietly. Walsh looked like she'd been slapped. Catherine, we discussed. I can't dispute evidence that's true, Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. The admission changed the entire dynamic of the room. Walsh's aggressive posture deflated. Gregory looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor, and Margaret Foster began calculating numbers on her legal pad. In light of Mrs. Ashford's admission, Foster said, I'm inclined to view Mr. Whitmore's settlement proposal as reasonable. Mrs. Walsh, would your client like to respond? Walsh requested a recess to consult with Catherine privately. They left the conference room together, leaving me alone with Douglas, Gregory, and the mediator. Gregory cleared his throat. I want you to know that I'm prepared to reimburse any expenses Catherine incurred during our relationship. That's generous, I said, but unnecessary. Catherine made her choices with full knowledge of their consequences. She's not a bad person. I never said she was, but she's not my person anymore either. When Catherine and Walsh returned, the fight had gone out of both of them. Walsh's opening demands for permanent spousal support and exclusive use of the house had been replaced by a grudging acceptance of Douglas's terms. My client agrees to the proposed asset division, Walsh said, but we're requesting spousal support for 36 months instead of 24. 24 months, Douglas replied, non-negotiable. Margaret Foster looked at Catherine. Mrs. Ashford, do you understand the terms being proposed? Catherine nodded. I understand. And do you agree to these terms? There was a long pause. Catherine looked at Gregory, then at me, then at her hands folded in her lap. I agree, she said finally. The actual paperwork took another hour to complete, but the essential business was finished. 12 years of marriage reduced to a series of financial calculations and legal obligations. Catherine would receive her statutory share of our assets, minus the money she'd spent on Gregory, plus 2 years of modest spousal support. The house would be sold, and the proceeds divided according to our respective contributions to the purchase price and improvements. As we prepared to leave, Catherine approached me in the hallway. "William, I want you to know that I'm sorry, not just about getting caught, but about all of it." I looked at her for a long moment, trying to find some trace of the woman I'd married 12 years ago. She was still there, underneath the guilt and embarrassment, but she felt like a stranger now. "I believe you," I said finally, "but sorry doesn't undo 18 months of lies. I know, I needed you to know. Now I know." Gregory appeared beside her, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. "Catherine, we should go." As they walked away together, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not for Catherine, exactly, but for the relationship they were building on the foundation of destroyed trust. Gregory had won the woman he wanted, but he'd also inherited all the doubt and suspicion that came with her. How could he ever be certain she wasn't lying to him the way she'd lied to me? How could she ever be sure he wouldn't betray her the way they'd both betrayed me? They deserved each other, but not in the romantic sense they probably imagined. Douglas and I rode the elevator down in comfortable silence. In the lobby, he turned to me with something approaching a smile. "That went better than expected," he said. She knew she was beaten. More than that, she knew she was wrong. There's a difference. We shook hands outside the building, and I walked to my truck feeling lighter than I had in months. The legal proceedings weren't completely finished. There would still be paperwork to file, assets to divide, and a house to sell, but the essential business was done. Catherine was no longer my problem to solve. That evening, I called my business partner, Tom Rodriguez, and asked him to meet me for dinner. Tom had been asking careful questions about my extended absence from the office, clearly sensing that something significant was happening in my personal life. "Divorce," I told him over steaks at his favorite restaurant. "It'll be final in a few months." Tom nodded thoughtfully. He'd been married to the same woman for 23 years and had the kind of stable relationship that made other people's marital disasters seem incomprehensible. "Sorry to hear it," he said. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected. It turns out that ending a bad marriage feels a lot like recovering from a long illness." "Any chance of reconciliation?" I thought about Catherine sitting in that conference room, admitting to 18 months of deception while her lover sat beside her. "None whatsoever." Tom raised his beer in a mock toast. "To new beginnings, then." "To honest endings," I countered. We drank to both. The next few weeks passed in a blur of practical arrangements. I found a downtown apartment with high ceilings and large windows, the kind of space I'd always wanted, but had never pursued, because Catherine preferred suburban comfort. I bought new furniture, set up a home office, and gradually assembled the physical framework of a life that was entirely my own. The house sold quickly. Catherine's real estate connections proved useful for something at least, and the proceeds were divided exactly according to our settlement agreement. She moved in with Gregory before the closing, which saved everyone the awkwardness of extended cohabitation during the transition. My business thrived with the increased attention I was able to give it. Without the emotional drain of a failing marriage, I found myself more creative, more focused, and more willing to take the kinds of calculated risks that led to significant growth. 6 months after that midnight confrontation in our kitchen, the divorce was finalized. I received the official decree in the mail on a Tuesday morning, along with a brief note from Douglas, congratulating me on the successful conclusion of the proceedings. That evening, I sat in my new apartment with a glass of expensive whiskey and tried to feel something significant about the official end of my marriage. Relief, sadness, anger, regret, any of the emotions that seemed appropriate for such a milestone. Instead, I felt peaceful. Catherine had given me an unexpected gift with her betrayal. She'd forced me to confront the reality that our marriage had been slowly suffocating both of us, and she'd provided the catalyst I'd needed to build something better from the wreckage. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the woman who'd broken my heart just enough to set it free. Outside my windows, the city sparkled with the lights of 8 million people living their own complicated lives, making their own difficult choices, and dealing with their own versions of love, loss, and the messy business of human relationships. I was one of them now, not half of a failing marriage, but a complete person charting his own course through whatever came next. It was exactly where I wanted to be. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call from Mrs. Henderson. "William, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from that nice young woman at your office." "Not at all, Mrs. Henderson. How are you doing?" "Oh, I'm fine, dear. But I thought you should know. Catherine and that man of hers had quite the argument in the driveway last night. Police cars and everything." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "Is everyone all right?" "No one was hurt, if that's what you're asking. But there was a lot of shouting about money and some woman named Lisa. Catherine left in a taxi around midnight, and he drove off in that fancy car of his like the devil was chasing him." Lisa. I made a mental note to ask Tom if he knew anyone by that name in Gregory's social circle. "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Henderson." "Well, I figured you might want to be prepared in case Catherine comes around looking for sympathy. You always struck me as too nice for your own good." After hanging up, I called Douglas to give him a heads up about potential complications. "Domestic disturbance calls can sometimes lead to violations of divorce decree terms," he said. "If Catherine contacts you directly, instead of going through legal channels, document everything." "Understood." "How are you adjusting to civilian life?" It was Douglas's little joke. He always referred to divorce as a kind of military discharge from the institution of marriage. "Better than expected. I'm actually thinking about expanding the business." "Excellent. Nothing heals a broken heart like a thriving bank account." That afternoon, I was reviewing proposals for a major new client when Rebecca knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "Catherine Ashford." My ex-wife stood in the reception area looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past few months. Her clothes were expensive but wrinkled. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and she had the brittle composure of someone holding themselves together through sheer willpower. "Hello, William." "Catherine, what can I do for you? Could we talk privately?" I led her to my office, noting how she took in the changes I'd made since her last visit. New furniture, updated equipment, framed photos of recent business achievements where our wedding picture used to sit. She didn't comment immediately, but her eyes moved carefully around the room, cataloging the differences the way someone does when they're trying to understand how much time they've missed. The space no longer felt shared or transitional. It was decisively mine, purposeful and orderly, stripped of anything sentimental. "You've done well for yourself," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a quiet acknowledgement that life had gone on, without her. "Business is good. What brings you here?" She took a breath, clearly steeling herself for whatever she'd come to say, fingers interlacing and then separating again, as if she couldn't quite decide what to do with her hands. "I need advice." "Legal advice? Because if so, you should call Jennifer Walsh." "Not legal advice, personal advice, from someone who knows me well enough to tell me the truth." The request was so unexpected that I found myself genuinely curious about where this was heading. Of all the reasons she could have shown up here, this hadn't been one of them. "I'm listening. Gregory is having an affair." The irony was so perfect that I had to resist the urge to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was almost mathematically precise, cause and effect looping back on itself. "How do you know?" "The same way you knew about us, I suppose. Late nights, mysterious phone calls, charges on his credit card for places he claims never to have been." Her voice was steady, but there was an edge underneath it, the sharpness of someone who already knows the answer and is hoping to be proven wrong anyway. Have you confronted him? Last night. He denied everything, of course. Said I was being paranoid and jealous. She looked out the window at the city below, traffic crawling like veins of light between buildings. Sound familiar? What do you want from me, Catherine? I want to know if you think I'm crazy for being suspicious, or if I'm just getting what I deserve. The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda, but all I saw was genuine confusion and pain, the kind that doesn't know where to land yet. You're not crazy, I said finally, and whether you deserve it or not isn't really the point. Then what is the point? The point is that you're asking the wrong person for advice. I'm the last man on earth who should be counseling you about relationship problems. Catherine smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. It was small, tired, but real. Actually, you might be the only person who can give me an honest answer. Everyone else either thinks I'm getting my comeuppance, or they're too polite to tell me what they really think. What do you want me to tell you? I want you to tell me if you think Gregory is capable of doing to me what we did to you. I considered the question seriously, setting aside instinct and resentment alike. Based on my limited interaction with him, yes, he's arrogant enough to think he won't get caught, and he's selfish enough not to care about the consequences if he does. That's what I was afraid you'd say. Catherine, why does it matter what I think? If you believe he's cheating, hire a private investigator and find out for sure. Because I don't know if I can handle going through what I put you through. The admission surprised both of us. Catherine looked startled that she'd said it out loud, as if the words had escaped before she could stop them, and I was genuinely taken aback by the vulnerability behind them. You handled it fine when you were the one doing the cheating, I pointed out. That's different. When you're the one having the affair, you tell yourself stories about why it's justified. When you're the one being cheated on. She trailed off, staring at her hands as if the answer might be written there. When you're the one being cheated on, you realize how much those stories are worth. Exactly. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside my office windows, the city continued its relentless rhythm of commerce and ambition, oblivious to the small human drama playing out 30 floors above the street. Horns blared, elevators chimed, deals were made and broken without anyone noticing us at all. What are you going to do? I asked finally. I don't know. Part of me wants to fight for the relationship, and part of me thinks I should just walk away before it gets worse. Those are your only two options? Catherine looked at me with something approaching her old sharpness, the analytical edge I remembered well. What do you mean? I mean, there's a third option you haven't considered. Which is? Accept that this is who Gregory is, the same way you accepted that cheating was who you were. Stop expecting fidelity from someone who's already proven he's not capable of it. The suggestion clearly hadn't occurred to her. She blinked, processing it slowly. You mean stay with him knowing he's unfaithful? I mean, decide what you actually want from the relationship and stop pretending it's something it's not. If you want companionship, financial security, and social status, Gregory can provide those things whether he's faithful or not. If you want trust and emotional intimacy, you're probably looking in the wrong place. Catherine stared at me like I'd suggested she take up professional wrestling. That's incredibly cynical. It's incredibly realistic. You and Gregory built your relationship on deception and betrayal. Why would you expect it to suddenly become honest and trustworthy? Because people can change. Can they? Did you change during our marriage, or did you just get better at hiding who you really were? The question hit home. Catherine's composure finally cracked, and for a moment she looked like the vulnerable woman I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago, uncertain, scared, and stripped of her usual defenses. I don't know, she said quietly. I honestly don't know anymore. I reached across the desk and handed her the box of tissues I kept for difficult client meetings. Catherine, I'm going to give you the same advice I'd give any friend in this situation. Figure out what you actually want from life, not what you think you should want. Then make choices that align with those goals, regardless of what other people expect from you. And if what I want is a faithful, loving relationship, then you need to find someone who's capable of providing that. Gregory isn't that person, any more than you were that person for me. She wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. How did you get so wise about relationships after yours failed so spectacularly? Failure is an excellent teacher, assuming you're willing to learn from it. Catherine stood up, smoothing her skirt and attempting to restore some dignity to her appearance. Thank you for being honest with me. Thank you for asking honest questions. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. William, for what it's worth, I really am sorry about how everything happened. I know you are, and for what it's worth, I hope you figure out how to be happy, even after everything I did to you. Especially after everything you did to me. Happiness is the best revenge against people who tried to make you miserable. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about the strange turn my life had taken. 6 months ago, Catherine had been my wife and my biggest source of stress. Today, she'd become something I'd never expected. A person I could actually have an honest conversation with. The irony wasn't lost on me. It had taken the complete destruction of our marriage for us to finally start telling each other the truth. That evening, I met Tom for our weekly dinner at the restaurant that had become our regular spot. I told him about Catherine's visit and her relationship troubles with Gregory. So she's getting a taste of her own medicine, Tom said, cutting into his steak with perhaps more force than necessary. That's one way to look at it. How do you look at it? I considered the question while I ate. I think she's learning the difference between fantasy and reality. When she was having an affair with Gregory, she could imagine he was this perfect romantic partner who understood her in ways I never could. Now she's discovering that he's just another flawed human being with his own selfish agenda. And you feel sorry for her? I feel sorry for anyone who builds their happiness on someone else's character flaws. It's not a sustainable foundation. Tom raised his beer in a mock toast. 2 sustainable foundations. I'll drink to that. The next few months passed quietly. My business continued to grow. I developed a comfortable routine in my new apartment, and I gradually built a social life that didn't revolve around couples' activities and shared obligations. I heard occasional updates about Catherine and Gregory through the small-town gossip network that Mrs. Henderson maintained with military precision. They'd broken up and reconciled twice, Gregory had been seen with various other women around town, and Catherine had apparently started seeing a therapist. None of it affected me directly, but I found myself oddly invested in Catherine's progress toward whatever version of happiness she was pursuing. Not because I wanted to reconcile, that ship had sailed and sunk, but because her success or failure would validate or challenge the advice I'd given her. A year after our divorce was finalized, I received an invitation to Catherine's wedding, to someone named David Mitchell, not Gregory Thornton. The invitation was handwritten on expensive stationery, with a brief personal note. I thought you should know that I finally took your advice about finding someone capable of providing what I actually wanted. Thank you for helping me figure out what that was. Catherine, I RSVP'd that I wouldn't be attending, but I sent a generous wedding gift with a card that read, "Wishing you the happiness you deserve." Because ultimately, that's what I wanted for both of us. The happiness we'd never been able to create together, but might be able to find with other people who were better suited to our respective needs and temperaments. The marriage had failed, but the people in it had survived to try again with better information and more realistic expectations. In the end, that felt like victory enough. 2 years after receiving Catherine's wedding invitation, I found myself back in Douglas Whitmore's office, but this time for a much more pleasant reason. "Congratulations," he said, reviewing the prenuptial agreement I'd asked him to prepare. "Sarah seems like a wonderful woman." Sarah Chen was a forensic accountant I'd met during a joint investigation involving corporate cybersecurity and financial fraud. She was brilliant, direct, and refreshingly honest about her expectations from both professional and personal relationships. "She is," I agreed. "And she's practical enough to appreciate the wisdom of clear legal agreements. After your experience with Catherine, I imagine you both value transparency." "We value reality. Sarah knows exactly who I am and what I'm capable of, just like I know who she is. No illusions, no fantasy projections, no expectations that either of us will become someone we're not." Douglas smiled his thin smile. "That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the most unromantic. I can't decide which. It's honest. And after 12 years of dishonesty, I find honesty incredibly romantic." The prenup was straightforward. Separate property remained separate. Jointly acquired assets would be divided equitably, and both parties waived claims to spousal support in the event of divorce. Sarah had insisted on including a fidelity clause that would void the financial protections if either party committed adultery. "Insurance policy," she'd explained when she suggested it. "If either of us decides to cheat, we forfeit the right to claim we were protecting our financial interests." I'd agreed immediately. After Catherine, the idea of entering another relationship with built-in consequences for betrayal seemed like simple common sense. The wedding was small, immediate family, close friends, and a few business associates. We held it in Sarah's parents' backyard, with a reception that featured her mother's legendary dumplings and a playlist that mixed classical music with contemporary jazz. Mrs. Henderson attended as my guest, having become something of a surrogate grandmother figure since my divorce. She wore her best dress and spent the entire reception interrogating Sarah's relatives about their intentions toward me. "I like her," she told me during the father-daughter dance. "She's got sense, and she looks at you like you're actually there instead of like you're a piece of furniture she's stuck with." High praise from you. I don't give out compliments lightly. That ex-wife of yours never appreciated what she had. Catherine and I weren't right for each other. It took us 12 years to figure that out, but we got there eventually. And now you're right for this one. Now I'm right for this one. During our honeymoon in Japan, Sarah and I spent long evenings talking about our expectations for marriage, our individual goals, and how we wanted to handle the inevitable conflicts that arise when two independent people decide to build a life together. "I don't want to be the kind of couple that stops being individuals," Sarah said, as we soaked in a traditional hot spring outside Kyoto. "I want to be two complete people who choose to share their completeness with each other. No losing ourselves in the relationship. No losing ourselves in the relationship," she agreed. "And no pretending to be someone we're not just to avoid difficult conversations. Even if those conversations are uncomfortable? Especially if they're uncomfortable. Comfortable lies are what destroy marriages." I thought about Catherine, probably settling into her own marriage with David Mitchell, hopefully having learned the same lessons about honesty and realistic expectations. "Agreed," I said, taking Sarah's hand. "To uncomfortable truths and sustainable foundations. To uncomfortable truths and sustainable foundations." 6 months later, I ran into Gregory Thornton at a coffee shop downtown. He looked older, more worn around the edges, with the slightly desperate air of someone whose charm was no longer sufficient to carry him through life's complications. "William," he said, approaching my table with obvious reluctance. "How are you?" "Very well, thanks." "How are you doing, Gregory?" "Can't complain." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to leave, but feeling obligated to continue the conversation. "I heard you got married. Last year. Sarah's a forensic accountant. That's practical." It works for us. Gregory ordered his coffee and lingered by my table, apparently wrestling with something he wanted to say. He stood there longer than was socially comfortable, shifting his weight slightly, glancing once toward the window and then back at me. It was the posture of a man caught between guilt and the hope for absolution. The cafe hummed softly around us, cups clinking, espresso machines hissing, but his hesitation created a small pocket of silence that felt oddly intimate. "Look," he said finally, exhaling as if he'd been holding his breath for several minutes. "I want you to know that I never meant for things to happen the way they did with Catherine." "I know." The answer came easily, without calculation or restraint. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "You do?" "Gregory, you didn't set out to destroy my marriage any more than Catherine set out to become an adulteress. You both just made a series of choices that led to predictable consequences." He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, his eyebrows pulling together as he tried to process the idea. People expect fury or bitterness in moments like this. They're prepared to defend themselves against it. They're never ready for calm. "You're not angry?" "What would be the point? Being angry at you would be like being angry at gravity for making things fall. You are who you are, you did what you did, and life moved on." There was no accusation in my voice, just statement, observation. "That's very philosophical of you." "It's very practical of me. Anger is expensive, and I prefer to spend my emotional energy on things that actually improve my life." That landed. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped slightly, the way his mouth tightened as if he were swallowing something unpleasant but necessary. Gregory's coffee was ready. He collected it from the counter and returned to my table one last time, holding the cup like it was an anchor. "For what it's worth," he said, hesitating again, "Catherine really did care about you. She talked about you a lot during that time." "I'm sure she did. But caring about someone and being capable of a faithful relationship with them are two different things." That truth had taken me months to accept. Saying it now felt almost effortless. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm starting to figure that out." After he left, I sat in the coffee shop thinking about the strange journey that had brought me from that midnight confrontation in my kitchen to this moment of peaceful indifference toward the man who'd helped end my first marriage. The emotional distance surprised me. What once would have felt like an open wound now registered as little more than a scar. I wasn't grateful for what Gregory and Catherine had done. Betrayal was still betrayal, regardless of its ultimate consequences. But I was grateful for what their betrayal had taught me about myself, about relationships, and about the difference between the life I'd been living and the life I actually wanted. Loss had stripped away illusion, and in doing so, it had given me clarity. That evening, I told Sarah about the encounter over dinner. The restaurant was warm and softly lit, the kind of place designed to encourage conversation rather than distraction. "How did it feel to see him?" she asked. "Like running into someone I used to work with at a job I didn't like. Mildly interesting, but not particularly relevant to my current situation." She smiled at that. "That's healthy. That's honest, which, as it turns out, is the same thing." Sarah reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers warm and steady. "I love that about you." "What?" "Your commitment to seeing things as they actually are, instead of as you wish they were. It's a useful skill. It's a rare skill. Most people spend their entire lives trying to force reality to match their fantasies." I thought about Catherine, hopefully learning to build her happiness on truth instead of illusion. I thought about Gregory, probably still trying to charm his way through life without accepting responsibility for the consequences of his choices. And I thought about Sarah and myself, two people who'd chosen to build something real together instead of something that merely looked good from the outside. No performances, no carefully edited versions of ourselves, just honesty, even when it was inconvenient. To rare skills, I said, raising my wine glass. To rare skills, Sarah agreed. Outside our dining room window, the city sparkled with the lights of millions of people living their own complicated lives, making their own difficult choices, and learning their own hard lessons about love, loss, and the messy business of human relationships. Some of them would learn quickly and build something lasting. Others would repeat the same mistakes until the consequences finally forced them to change. All of them would eventually discover what I'd learned in that midnight kitchen confrontation 2 years ago, that the truth might be painful, but it's also the only foundation solid enough to support a life worth living. And that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a failing marriage is for it to fail completely, clearing the ground for something better to grow in its place. The sink had stopped dripping. The marriage was over. The new life had begun. It was exactly where I wanted to be.